There's another person just there. Can we spread the line out just a little bit?
Spread the line out.
Brilliant, that's ideal. Okay, I need some over here. So I'll go into the end and I'll need to leave them come down. And the other's going to roll them along the fence there. So we're going to need a couple doing the rolling as far as Chris with the catwalk there. Okay, so shall I put you two in charge of the up the tops? And you two can... We won't need to wait for the light. There's a call.
The real bad bit is the sandbags. You haven't got to the sandbags yet. There's that dead weight in it.
I think if there's any that are completely split like that, what we'll do is we'll empty them onto the ball heap there. And what I'll do, I'll just go see if I can find some water removing stuff. Would you mind actually going up and see if you get another 3 buckets?
What's the best way down there?
My thing is to hold the bucket at a slight angle and go.
Yeah, just shoving it in.
And it just goes really quick that way.
Oh, just chuck it over on the long grass there, that'd be great. Thanks.
We're okay actually, we're nearly good here. Yeah.
Right everybody, the plan is that rather than trying to roll this up on the trench, because of all the structures in it, we're going to pull it out over there in one piece, flatten it out, and then roll it up. Okay, right, let's go then. You're right, Claire?
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out. Slide off of this.
Is it snagging? Okay, off we go. Are you alright there, Chris?
Morning.
So once we've taken all the tyres off and the plastic and the stones, before we actually start digging properly, we need to tidy up the trench edges and we need to weed all the plants that have grown up over the winter. So we just straighten everything up and get all the weeds out. Yeah, just make it look more clear for the stratigraphy and the different contexts, and to make it just tidier and more professional looking as an excavation.
Basically, the procedure, even with this complex stuff, is the same as with something very, very simple. So you open up your trench, you remove the topsoil and any subsoil, and then basically we clean whatever we've exposed. We scrape it, we try to create a nice sharp surface. We'll bring out the contrasting colours of different things that are lying there. And from that you can identify what's archaeology, what's not archaeology. So as you go along, you're hopefully also clocking which deposits appear to lie on top of which other deposits.
We had this slab over there, then we took the slab up, and it was at that point we found that pit. Though we now know that that pit, in fact, appears to be overlying a bigger pit that's earlier. So there must have been an earlier feature, which we haven't yet got to, but which hopefully I shall get the edge of when I've taken out this material. So we recorded that.
So what we've done a trial trench. It's called a sondage. It's fairly rapidly going through the layers. What's happened is this structure is slumping. You can see this curve of wall here. That's presumed to be the top of another building which is underneath this one. So this one is about 2900 BC, so it's an even earlier building. And they built on its ruins presumably. So they've been building up the layers and building them up. And you can see the walls are slumped.
As soon as you see this colour change coming through, stop at that. That's just starting to change there, so stop when you get it.
For prehistoric Britain, this is absolutely unique. You know, it may well be the most complex prehistoric site in northwest Europe.
Having the trench straight from the topsoil on a site like this is really interesting. We didn't know what was going to come up, and the geophysics in that area weren't very clear. But to actually start with my own trench, it's all my own records. I'm applying all the contexts. Having that sense of control is really nice. I like that a lot. The first week, there was just a few of us working in the trench and experienced people getting down to the very top of the archaeology. But then the second week is when the students arrived. So we went from having almost nobody to having 20 students. We just went straight into student training. And it's gone down really well. They've all been really engaged. And we've had some treasure out of it, which is good.
I manage people's expectations, so the students, when they come, they're very enthusiastic and they're very keen to know more and want to know what it's like to be an archaeologist. I always try and manage their expectations to a certain degree. Obviously, the Ness is a fantastic site, and there's very few sites like this in the world that they can work on. And even in the best possible circumstances, you know, the chances of working on another site like this again are, they're not remote, but you know, you have to make it happen. And so I always kind of say, look, you've got to take the rough with the smooth with archaeology. There will be sites that you work on which are downright boring and are difficult to understand, and you do have difficult conditions and difficult people you're working for and with. But you have to be utterly professional about it and just devote as much time and effort to doing those things which seem less important, seem less worthwhile, as you would do for something like here at the Ness, because regardless of whether it's a Roman ditch in Kent or whether it's a brick firing kiln in Sheffield or whatever, then it's all our past, it's all archaeology, it's all important. And if we treat it any differently to anything else that we're excavating, then we're not doing it justice and not doing ourselves justice either.
I bring up to 13 students a year to the Ness from the US. I've loved working with the drone this year. It was very much a last-minute addition to my arsenal of electronic tools. I'm working with a student who's working on her senior project using the drone. So together we've learned quite a bit about it, the programs to operate it, and learning about camera angles, working with the staff on site to also learn how we can use the drone to better preserve the site record.
The idea of filming a drone at the Ness, sounded pretty amazing because it's such an amazing landscape. I don't know, one thing I've been trying to think about is how to produce something that is useful for archaeologists of present and future, but also that would be something interesting for people that know nothing about the site.
Well, I'm an archaeological geologist. Coming here, I've become very interested in applying geoarchaeological techniques to archaeology on site. So the instrument I have with me now is a portable or handheld XRF, X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, and it does chemical analysis of material, focusing particularly here at the Ness on soils.
I'm Jo, and I interface with Scott's work, and Scott is using different techniques to look at the chemistry of the soils. the sampling programme that I run here at Ness of Brodgar is soil micromorphology, and that is the study of soils down the microscope, to put it really simply. And the way we do that, the way the soil gets to the stage where it can be looked at down the microscope, we take a block of soil using either a tin or cutting a block of soil straight out of a section on site. So we've got the archaeological deposits in a big block or in a tin, and we take it back to the lab and we use various techniques to turn that block of soil into a hard block full of resin. And the important thing is that the structure of the soil is maintained by doing that. The soil doesn't collapse. We've got a lovely hard block of soil which gives you just exactly the same structure that we would have seen on site. So we can see what's in the soil, but we can also see the way it's organised. We can see voids and cracks and spaces. We can kind of look at environmental processes and what's happened to those soil deposits, as well as looking at the archaeology. Sometimes that really relates to the use of buildings, metals, phosphates, other chemical properties, things that are held in the soil that can sometimes tell you about activities in different areas. And again, it's the strength of that is in mapping. So taking lots of samples across a building. One sample could mean anything. A whole pattern of samples where you can see spikes in activity and intensities coming through. That's kind of what we're looking for. So it's a real team effort, really.
I'm a geomatics officer here at the Archaeology Institute. It's a natural word. It's basically where geomatics people create maps from data, survey data that we either do ourselves or we get given by a client. So we can produce large maps which cover large areas, marine geophysics data, or specific site data like this, which is quite compact.
And I work with Mark to do the geomatics of the Ness.
And the letter here is not necessarily learning everything about geomatics, but learning how to use the various survey instruments out on the Ness of Brodgar, the laser scanner, the Leica Viva, GNSS, which is a global navigation satellite system, and then how to use the various processing packages, like a Geofis Combine to process the survey data, like a Cyclone for the point cloud data, and then we've got AutoCAD Map 3D, the CAD runs, GS, and GS.
Go 2 to your left. No.
Why don't you move it? Can you give us 1 meter over?
Okay. That will be 7-1. 1-7-1.
I think so. Great. Correct. What have we got?
We have right in the middle there, Mark, workstone, yes please.
Workstone. 2, 8, 4, 6, 7.
Yeah, that's okay.
Hang on, I'm not on the point yet.
And for once, that is very precisely in the position I took it out that day. So.
Anything else?
Yes, I've got an environmental.
Environmental sample.
3929.
3912.310.
See this flagstone? This is rotting, and look at the colour of that. What you find with these stones is you get a range of colours. They also give this fantastically soft, kind of almost powdery, almost milled face powder.
See, this one I think looks like makeup, but I like that because it reminds me of face powder, but almost a blush. We can color with this too. But you get all these cool earth colors out of these rocks. But you can again see this has 2 for 1 on it. You have that, and then you have the other side is a little bit more pastel. Isn't that pretty? 2 for 1. This is a piece of siltstone. Again, you're dealing with sea bottom from a huge inland sea, and you can see how it chalks. You don't have to heat it, you don't have to do anything to it. It just will react like chalk.
I was a student here in Orkney with the Institute of Archaeology, and the year that I was there as a student they found some of the decorated stonework, the coloured stuff with hematite, bits and pieces, so that was quite exciting to try some of that. And then did a little bit of experiment with some of the pigments. Yeah, I remember at one point they did wonder if some of the hematite could have been used on the stone and then maybe they scratched through it and you would see some, possibly with some of the designs You would see them then when they were scratched through the hematite, or it could just be coincidence that some of the stones that were red maybe had scratchings as well.
If you look at the hearths, most of them are not square, they're slightly or completely rectangular. Those hearthstones are set into the ground and they aren't scorched. I think that was baked with rock that doesn't blow up, rock that gets warm. The other thing this will do, warm rock, igneous rock, will reheat, cool down, reheat, cool down. You can keep reusing that to heat water, to heat soup, to heat something. And whatever they were doing, it was in the fireplace. And it had been toasted and roasted to within an inch of its life, and they shoveled it out. They couldn't lift it.
We're in the entrance of Structure 8. And what we've got beside this entrance is a strange mound of what appears to be burnt material. You can see that by this quite deep ochre red colour. What it looks like, and we don't know, but what it looks like is that they've taken some material from the fire, which you can see there is a very similar colour, and just mounded it up by the door in this corner. And they've piled this burnt material up against the interior wall of the entrance of Structure 8. It's not a particularly big pile. It looks like it's overlaying the yellow clay of the floor surface, and it does resemble the material that's coming out of the hearth just about 2 meters away.
I do love working in Structure 8 actually, and it's just the most complicated archaeology that you can dig. It's so detailed and complex and interleaving, and I think all the archaeologists that come here love that because it's a challenge, because a lot of sites that you dig are not necessarily challenging. You'll have like a cut feature, like a pit or a post hole, and you dig the fill out, and then that's it. It's quite straightforward. It's sort of bread and butter. Whereas this is you have to think all the time about what's going on and why is it all happening, and what does it mean. And got quite a small team this year as well, which is good. Actually, I prefer little teams to big teams because it can be a bit too much when you've got 10 people all asking you at the same time what to do.
Yeah, we're pretty tight. I mean, I'm very, very lucky to sort of have been paired up with her. What we're doing is we've opened up sections. They're almost miniature 50 centimeter wide trenches, 3 of them, one which runs the length of the building and one that runs across in sort of each of the 2 halves of the building. And we're doing that to get the relationships between the different floor and occupation deposits, with the idea that sort of next year we'll be able to work from those trenches out and sort of follow the floor deposits in plan.
Structure 8 is an interesting structure because obviously it's in the middle of the site, and it's we think it's probably one of the earliest structures, and of course it's sitting on top of 2 even earlier structures, so that in itself is interesting. Whether we'll ever get to those other structures, certainly not this season. Also, it's got the biggest number of hearths, so it's probably the longest structure that we've got at the moment on site. It's got potentially 5 or 6 hearths, and most structures have 1, some have 2, but this is a unusually high number of hearths to have on any building. And it's also got the biggest number of recesses and piers, so architecturally it's probably one of the more complicated ones. So days like today just get to the point where you're not sure you can work anymore because it's starting to get quite wet underfoot now, and of course we're all on really sensitive deposits, so we just have to be careful that we're not going to damage those, make things worse.
Well, this is possibly one of the windiest days we've ever had on site since I've been here in 4 years. It was pretty bad last year. We had winds of about 42, 45 miles an hour. This is stronger, the gusts are greater, because I actually have trouble standing up today, but it means that we have to proceed really slowly and carefully.
You can see the incoming rain. Because of the difference in the log. Oh yeah. Oh, you can see the line.
The weather is another part of the team, really. You can't separate the Ness from the weather. It's why we dig at the time we dig, for a short period of time, and it makes a big difference to what we're doing. I mean, when the gods are smiling on us, we don't have to open our toolboxes carefully. In the pocket of my other waterproofs, I've got some plastic bags that I'm using, Ziploc bags. I've got them bulldog clipped together and clipped to the inside of my coat, because it's so easy just for something to slip out of your grasp and go flying into the lock, and we don't want to lose bags, numbers or anything. But that is quite extraordinary weather today. And of course everything goes slower when it's a day like today. You can't help it, but at least we get a little bit done. And now the weather's looking really quite nice. Well, nice, that's it's all relative, isn't it? The sun's shining.
Do you guys want a hand down there? Because I'm finished in my bit.
Have a look in this middle area. I imagine there's water in there.
There is.
And there's a huge puddle in the corner of the trench here.
How was your weekend?
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah, it seems like we haven't got a lot done this year, really. It's been really, really slow, and then the weather as well. And just doing basic things like planning. You know, to do that, you've got to put grid points in and things like that, and just doing that has been a major task, really. So finally this morning we got 4 grid points in. Yeah. And that means we can move forward now, yeah, and get some planning done. But, you know, just doing something like that is a major task in itself, really.
Right, lunchtime.
Oh.
Today, because that's when we've got something to do.
Okay.
So I shan't be back until 4 o'clock to pick these bits and pieces up.
Alright,
Won't be alright?
Yeah, will I get the table up for you?
Yeah, you have a look.
Oh wow, Brian.
So you've got to sort out where you're going to put it all out now, or where you're going to keep some back and forth. Right, so if you get your table out,
Yes.
put out what you want, and then I'll talk to you
I'll
about that.
take these and stick them inside.
Yeah. It's food fairy, and what you do, we collect the food that's going to waste. We redistribute it to schools. We've got some families that are in a bit of a poor state, so we deliver to those as well. And then we do this, and what donations we do get, it goes towards keeping the van going. And if there's anything over at the end of the year, it has to go to charity. Yeah, you've got a nice treat here, so the first come, first served.
Oh wow. Oh my gosh.
There you go, first come, first served. Or share.
Look at that. Oh my gosh, is it cake? It's cake. It's cake. It's cake and kiwi fruit. Get yourself a party out with a clean phone. Oh, cool, baby.
Yeah, I know, very clean.
Yes, somebody just
Quicker.
Right, let's go back, please. The main structure you can see here is structure 10, the biggest on site, in many ways the most spectacular. Like the others, it's gone through several phases of rebuild and possible collapse. In its original plan, big square central chamber, rounded corners, and it seems to have probably incorporated an awful lot of peck decorated stone, much of it being yellow and red, just as you'll see in St Magnus's Cathedral. So it would have been, yeah, pretty spectacular. At some stage, structure 10 possibly collapses after a relatively short period, and then they rebuild it, but incorporate corner buttresses and reline some of the wall faces, so you end up with a kind of cruciform shaped central chamber. And during that reconstruction, underneath the corner buttresses, there's very special deposits like the carved stone ball, big blocks of decorated stone, and under the wall here we discovered last year lots of cattle bone. But also mixed in with that a single human arm bone, upper arm bone humerus, that seems to, the individual seems to have died about the same time as the cattle was being deposited. So not any bone of the ancestors or anything that are romantic like that. We don't go in for that here.
You have to keep your eyes open, but you'll gradually see people sort of congregating towards one point because somebody's found something nice, and the sort of Chinese whispers have gone round, and gradually sort of you end up with a crowd of sort of 15 people standing around, and go through the whole process of photographing and things like that, and then eventually it'll be lifted and it'll be something like half a mace head or something like that.
Nice. And I love the theatre of it, you know, when you can see that something big's going on.
Yeah, when people start buzzing, yeah.
Well, I knew, I walked by and there was only a couple of people, or 3 people, and I'm like, uh-oh.
There's never been so many people in Structure 10 before.
Yeah.
The more I cleaned off it, it's quite a slow process. With a leaf trowel, you take up the context very carefully. So it took a little while to come up, but it was a wonderful little while of it becoming more and more a nice thing. As I took more off it, it had more and more shape to it. Oh, it's not a hammerstone, it's more shaped like an axe, and actually it's quite a nice looking axe, and actually it's got a lovely point on it, and actually it's got this lovely band.
Get rid of some of this extra spoil, which is not as exciting, but needs to be done.
Everybody gets excited about finding something, and the things that we find are really precious to us. But they're all of our finds, really. They're the finds of the Ness, and they're the finds of everybody who works here.
That axe was under a fairly flat stone, and then some soil came out, and then there was another stone, then there was pottery under the other stone, and we're expecting some quite nice things under these stones. The site does seem to have patterns like that.
No, I didn't know.
You encounter these things and you basically have to remove all the deposits that you anticipate as being later. Ultimately, the end bit will be photographic before we're ready to remove it. You dig away the last bit that's holding it in place. You probably have another photo, maybe another drawing at that point, and then it's lifted.
They come in their little bags, and their little bags are pre-numbered. And those numbers that are on that bag are deeply significant. The numbers are the numbers of the small find, and they then go into a register, which then goes onto a database, which is then linked up to the actual scanned in 3D find spot of the piece. That number then sticks with that item for basically the rest of its existence.
7290? Is there a bag for that in French Pete?
No, I've got finished I'll be a while. So what are you asking for?
7290.
Have you got the ball there?
We need to take enormous care of every one of these items that comes in, because it's been out there for basically 5,000 years, and it's our responsibility to make sure that it can take the next part of the journey. And the first part of the journey on this site for most things is that we try and get them dried, and we try and get any earth, any material that's adhering to them, to try and get that off them so that we can make sure that we can identify what it is, and also, as I say, allow it to dry, because in dryness lies its safety for the future. There are very few things that come off this site that we want kept damp. So we spend a great deal of time drying little bags very, very carefully, laying things out to dry very carefully. Once they're all dry, they can be put away, and they're put away into particular storage boxes, and they will ultimately come out of these storage boxes to be looked at by the myriad of specialists who do the next part of the stage.
Sometimes there's
You've got quite clean ridges there, but you're flattening out the kind of ridges and the separations there with that one. So I think that this has had a life, possibly as some kind of polisher or whatever, a worked stone rather than a foreign stone.
We have a lot of tools that are made for use. So somebody has spent time thinking about form and realising form and making an object which you can then use in a particular way. And then we have a lot of other tools that are made by use. So it's almost a byproduct of a particular activity, and the edge of a stone gets ground or hammered or battered, but they're not actually being made as a distinctive type of object. And there's lots of them, but they're actually a fundamental part of daily life.
Well, mostly I do pottery, which is my specialisation, because we've got, 40,000 plus sherds, which is an awful lot, and they all have to be worked through, and they all have to be recorded in detail. But then again, what keeps you going all the time is that each little bag of pottery, it's like Christmas. You know, you could go through a whole day's worth and there's just dross, and then you find a beautifully decorated bit of pot, and it makes the day worthwhile. I can't actually say why pottery gripped me all these years ago, because I'm not a potter, I don't make pot. And people say, you know, they get a tremendous, a tingle almost handling a bit of pottery that's 5,000 years old, like this one here. But for me, the connection is not because somebody 5,000 years ago handled it and you might be the first person since then to handle it. The real connection is, I always think that it's a connection with the brain of the person. Multiple questions that a potter has to grapple with when making pot, and of course, for me, most importantly, what's it going to be used for?
Right, how do you feel about getting those out? Do you think you can do those on your own?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, give it a go then. What we think we've got down here at the moment, it looks like it could just be one really big pot. It looks almost as if somebody's dropped the pot like that and the walls have broken outwards, like the petals of a flower opening out. So there's a big piece rolled over there and some other chunks, and a whole series of pieces here. It's very, very tricky to excavate because it's so crumbly that you have to work around it extremely slowly and carefully. You almost have to feel your way with it sometimes. It's the texture, because it looks just like soil.
But they seem to be associated with different activities each building, which is intriguing really. You know, you've got in 12 you've got these big massive hearths, these big pottery spreads, and then in 8 you've got all these little alcoves with all these little hearths and lots of objects being found in there, you know, all these mace heads and things. We've now decided to put a section through this possible passageway, you know, those orthostats there, and see what's inside really, because you often get artwork associated with passageways. I think that it's really important that we investigate these areas in between more. We've sort of focused on the interior of the buildings, but I think we need to look at, you know, spaces in between. You know, when we first started, we weren't quite sure what we were going to get. It did look like the large orthostats were marking the entrance to some sort of passage running between structure 12, 26 and 30. And it appeared that it was going to be all really straightforward, and we potentially might get some nice decorated stone, but it soon became clear that it wasn't quite that straightforward. We'd then got a series of different things going off on different sides. All the time we've got this similar but different thing going on the two sides, marked by this massive orthostat down the middle of this apparent passage. It's become such a repetitive pattern that you can almost predict what is going to happen. So one side you've got a thin orthostat, you've got smaller slabs being used in the blocking, you've got cut marked stone being used in the blocking, you've got deposits of burnt animal bone largely being used, and much more pottery. The other side, we've got incised stone, much larger blocks being used in the blocking, and unburnt animal bone. But there seem to be similar events, parallel events running, because we found pottery to the left on one side, and I think it's fragments of the same vessel in the other side. So I think the events there running side by side, we were getting to the stage where we were thinking, somebody's trying to tell us something here, but I can't quite hear. And I think, well, all the time we're thinking, this is really fascinating. It's like somebody's knocking at their door, you know. Can you just say it a bit louder?
I guess we have our concept of what art is and what art's for, which, you know, there's a process of making, but there's a process of viewing as well, and the two are kind of inextricably linked. Whereas a lot of this stuff, you kind of wonder whether the linkage between the making and the viewing is quite the same in the Neolithic, and that possibly indicates that our concept of what art is isn't necessarily the same as what they're doing. The fact that they're making marks and incisions and designs on rock, they might not have considered that in the same way as we think of it as art. It might have a completely different kind of context and meaning. It's the making potentially is the important thing rather than the viewing, and the two things aren't associated in quite the same way.
Now, I want to pause here and say something about the peoples, plural, of the Neolithic, because I've already mentioned to you about 700 examples of decorated stone. The colour on the walls, the colour on some of the pottery, and indeed just these extraordinary buildings in themselves. If anyone's got any residual ideas of the people of the Neolithic squatting around a campfire grunting to each other, forget it. These were intelligent, capable people, probably looking just like you and me. Indeed, probably the main difference between them and you would have been lifespan. If they reached the age of 40, they would have been doing very well indeed, except they probably would have been racked by pain from degenerative diseases, partly brought on by a heavy lifestyle, heavy work to be done during their lives. But really very intelligent, capable people. These buildings did not all go to use.
We need more people.
Yeah, that worked well.
But when they did go to use,
wow,
they didn't just leave them.
Nothing to see here, sorry.
There really is.
Get them all out of here.
They're refusing to go.
Ah, there we go. Woo.
You push this under here.
Yeah, I need someone else. I'm supporting.
Yeah,
this.
no, I just want a lever under here. I can't do it and stand on it at the same time. That's it. Is it off? Just one more this side. Nothing. Sorry folks, no Ark of the Covenant, no Carstone Ball. No, that's good. Not yet.
There might be something under that bit.
Right, get back to work.
Sun's over.
Oh, well, that was a good workout. Oh well, had to be done. That's done.
You have to take a decision in the way that you are digging. If it's a correct decision, then it's fine because you are doing the things well. But if it was a wrong decision, the fact that you know that it was a wrong decision will help you to understand what it was going on. So then you can solve the problem. But if you are not taking the decision, you will be moving around to the problem without solving it. So this is why we have to take it. Sometimes we are right, sometimes we are not right, but that's it.
Where we're standing at the moment is about the highest part of the site. So you would imagine that the highest part of the site is also the longest lived part of the site because deposits start to build up here first. And you can kind of see that the land falls off in pretty much every direction. So by the time you get out to Trench J, the structure 5 is almost built directly onto the natural clay. You've only got the sort of, I don't know, 60 centimetres of archaeology or something.
Trench J, yes, has the Great Wall of Brodgar running through it, and that being, well, over 4 metres wide.
The rest of the trench is mostly one building, which is structure 5, which is our early Neolithic building. And so both the giant wall and that building were built onto natural boulder clay. They'd stripped off all the turf and it was just a bare surface. We're not sure which one was built first. We don't know which way around it was, but we know that they're both early parts of this site's story. So what we really want to do is get into that building. We want to have a look at how big it is, how it was used. So yeah, thankfully we can get into that. There's not much on top of it that's late Neolithic. Just our one chance to really see across a big area, get a whole building excavated of that period.
Well, we've uncovered an amazing amount of stuff of hearths. You know, we know where structure 5 is going now. We don't have the end visible, but we know where it's going to be. And then we know where there's internal features within the structure as well. And in terms of like the use of the building, we know that the western half, we know that that collapsed and the eastern end was still in use after that point. And there's more, because we know a bit more about its relation to the Great Wall, because we know that that eastern end of structure 5 was in use after the Great Wall had already started being robbed. It had probably been robbed much to the level we see it now.
The one thing that I can tell you with definite certainty is that there's nothing we know that's definitely certain. So just remember that. Behind you, you'll see structure 5. The structure 5 dates from around 3500 BC and as such is one of the earliest buildings on site. Below structure 5 you'll see a massive big wall. A huge big wall, or the Great Wall of Brodgar. The Great Wall is massive. It's 4 metres thick down there. We thought that it enclosed the complex. And we thought that so much that we've spent 2 years on this side of the Ness looking for a connecting wall. And we haven't found one. What we think the wall was doing was it's a visible sign. It's this showing off. This wall that states, this is our place, look what we can do, we're better than you. You want to come through here, you speak to us.
It's a bit frustrating at the moment. There's nothing clear emerging from it. It's just all rubbly stuff. Well, we're going to cut through it anyway in the sondage and see what's there. Okay, well, keep an eye on it. I don't think it's hugely significant just at the moment, but keep an eye on how it goes. It does start to look interesting.
Well, trench 5, there was this belief that there was a wall connecting the ends of the transverse walls going over the peninsula, and it didn't turn up in trench X. So trench Y was opened because it was a much more convenient place to open a trench that ran right down the side. We kept extending it till we came to the edge of the water.
What the hell, that'll do. Right, so that's looking west.
Okay.
It's horrible, I know.
I'm going to have one looking north. We found absolutely no trace of a wall, or indeed any evidence that there ever had been a wall. No robbing deposits or levelling platforms or anything like that. So we don't think there ever was a wall. We think the Ness was closed off at either end, and the locks were probably forming the boundaries to the north and south.
Which trench is this?
Yeah. Why?
Why? Dig it. Was anything found?
More things were found out by not finding anything. We were looking for the edge of the wall.
Shop on the bottom file there. Yeah. And then we can move this stuff forward.
Well, we can do that.
Okay, I'm going in.
Couple of people could chuck these rocks down the trench as well. Yeah.
What you're standing at is another part of the Ness complex, which has not turned out what we expected. When we started here, we did geophysics kind of underground radar, and what this showed was at the tip here, there was what appeared to be concentric rings. And I initially interpreted those concentric rings as representing revetment stone walls within another maze-house type chamber tomb.
Well, it changes quite a lot every year because it's completely new and we didn't really know what it was when we first came to dig there. When we had an idea what it was, we thought it would be a chamber tomb, but it's turned out rather different. And it's turned out to be a enormous mound of midden material, basically. But anyway, it's a lovely trench and it's very complicated, like most of the parts of the site are.
So we decided we'd investigate, and what we discovered was that these concentric rings were in fact the revetment walls of an Iron Age ditch.
And it's great, the kind of little insights that we got into the Iron Age stuff up the top, and it's very distinctive from the kind of Neolithic remains as well. Yeah, it's really nice little insights, and it's really nice to think about how significant the enhancement of that end of the peninsula would have been, and how prominent that mound would have been at the end of the Brodgar Peninsula. If you had a really wide, 5 metre wide ditch with a 3 metre wide stone revetted bank at the top of it, it would have really been quite a prominent monument. It would have been incredibly visible in the landscape as well.
And you can see on the upslope there, kind of large rough blocks, that's the upper side of the ditch. But it was what this ditch had been dug into. The rest of this mound is basically made up of Neolithic rubbish. It's the biggest Neolithic midden rubbish heap in Britain. They're creating a massive mound, a monument in its own right of all this rubbish. And what it is, it's reflecting the status and affluence of the Ness. So the people who came here were creating this monument almost to say, look at us, conspicuous consumption gone mad. And within this midden there's obviously lots of information to be extracted by the archaeologists about the economy, the types of animals they were keeping, the type of material they were using in the fires, etc, etc, etc. But we still felt a bit cheated that we didn't find a chamber tomb. So we thought we'd find one, but we didn't. We found something even more extraordinary, because at the base of this mound is a structure like no other. You can start to see this big upright stones there, bits of wall facing here, what looks like a pavement around here. There's a drain running through here. More upright stones scattered about the place, and to begin with it didn't make much sense at all. They just seemed to be separate elements which didn't join up no matter how we tried. But then it all became clear. What we thought were separate upright stones, some of them turned out to be massive ones. This one, that's not the end of it. It extends through here out to about here. It's over 4 meters long. So it's set on edge. You're looking at a huge structure. Internally, it's about 7.5, 8 meters across. How long it is, we don't know because it's disappearing out of our trench. But everything about the structure, a unique construction method as far as we can tell. It's unlike any of the other structures that we've so far uncovered. We haven't got any dating evidence. This is one of the prime objectives for this year, but then it'll be all systems go to remove more of this kind of overlying midden deposits, and we are actually going to extend the trench slightly, just to kind of, but there we hope to get the external, because the geophysics that we did here would suggest that although the walling has been very badly robbed here, over on the other side it does seem to, well, the geophysics suggests it might be slightly better.
Okay? Yeah, because I don't want that you run close to the section, and this woman wants to survive, okay? So take care of her. Yes, and I don't want the tires inside, okay?
It's one of the most difficult things that I had been digging. This is quite complicated stuff. And now I'm just looking for the structure 27. So yeah, it was complicated and it was very challenging at the beginning. That's it. Now that you know what we have to do, we just have to dig. Okay? So we mainly will focus for today outside the building, so in that corner and in that corner, if we see, okay, if not, we can also.
Everything's good to go?
The first year I had a drone made for everyone but can be used professionally as well. So the drone industry is changing tremendously and very, very rapidly. So last year I wanted to experiment with a multispectral sensor. Essentially what it can do is identify crop marks. Crop marks are the vegetational growth due to what the soil is underground, which might reflect what happened in the past archaeologically. In a way it's like using geophysics, where they're actually sending signals under the ground. We're looking at the signals the plant might get off from the archaeology below. We have a very large, it's an industry standard drone used mostly for construction, infrastructure, observations. It's very stable, it handles very well in the wind. So, the industry's changing. I'm now a pilot with the United States government. I took a course and passed an exam. I'm classified as a professional drone pilot. I'm hoping to train students on the technology and to be able to fly. And I have support from my university to develop this program.
Okay, that video comes out, it's going to be awesome.
Cool. Right, I'm going to get me.
Yeah, I'm landing it. It's going to start beeping at me because the battery's getting low.
The battery? So you have to charge it again?
I have 3 sets.
Okay. Yes, so we are safe.
But one is charging now, and the other one's empty because I just finished it. So
Okay.
by the time he's done, the other one should be charged.
The end of every season, we have to go through all the documentation that we produce during this season and make a final report of this. So all the context and everything that has been recorded and documented during the season, we have to make sense of it and put it together and relate it with everything that it was recorded in previous seasons. So to have an overview of what is going on. So just to make sure that the next person that carry on in the trench and in the site have all the documentation done. And if we don't record this knowledge, probably it's lost.
I think it's brilliant. It's just the sort of thing I love doing because it's a puzzle and it's unpacking that puzzle. It's been a nightmare to try and record because as well as the sort of plan thing, you've got this 3D element to it as well. So it's not just the physical nature of the recording, but it's the making sure you record it on paper as much as possible, your thought processes and things like that. And you can't always record that on a context sheet. That's why I've ended up this year with loads and loads of overlays of photographs that I'm annotating, sketch plans that I'm colour coding to try and get the sense of what's happening in this structure. If you want to understand things, you have to unpick them. And I know it's a destructive process, but unless we do it, we'll never understand what's going on, will we?
You can't do too much recording because effectively archaeology is a destructive process. So once you've actually engaged in digging, the thing that you're digging isn't there anymore, you've destroyed it. So what we're ultimately working towards is a process of preservation by record, which is all the paperwork, the drawings, the photographs and everything like that.
Is that a t-shirt to do?
The site gets started, doesn't it? And you just forget. And now I'm thinking, yeah, we could have looked at that really.
Because a lot of that was rotten.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah.
I thought you were going for a ride around on the drone. That was much It just makes the club stuff. Oh, well, that's all right then. Yeah, I know. You've got to look after yourself now.
Yeah, all the heads.
Quite heavy.
Yeah, but if it doesn't take up moisture any more than the given rate, what's up to that? Has it been fired again or got people again? Oh, I don't know. Too many imponderables.
Yeah, it is. And that doesn't make it a garage or something, but if you built some enormous multi-skilled
Okay, I've got some old bits of sheet. Want some big bits go right way across. Okay.
I just wanted to see some ones around like an Egypt.
Just unroll it from there while we pull it, yeah? Jenny, give that to Travis. That's it, we got it.
Use stones to hold this down.
Stones.
Hey, Baron.
Right, let's get one of the big sheets in.
Okay.
And we'll just cover the whole thing now.
Right.
And fire it. So there's a big sheet on that side.
Yeah. Got a massive one right at the top of that.
You are, but it's not.